You're listening to Systemic Error Podcast. The failure was designed.
General sounds the alarm as Trump puts U.S. citizens in grave danger, based on an article by Thomas Kika. Trump's war is exposing the cost of Imperial overreach. A private warning, not a public strategy. The reporting here is simple enough. Gen. Alexus Grynkewich, the commander of U.S. European Command, has privately warned Pentagon officials that the military no longer has enough naval capacity to keep protecting Israel from incoming missiles without forcing a choice between the mission and defending the U.S. homeland. That is the real story. Not the anxious tone, not the anonymous sourcing, not the think tank gloss. The story is that Trump's Iran war is consuming American military stockpiles to the point where even the Pentagon's own senior officers are being pushed into triage. Power sits in the White House. The article dances around the central fact, but it is not hard to name it. Donald Trump made the decision to wage the war. He owns the escalation, the depletion, and the consequences. A general can warn. A commander can request another destroyer. But the authority to initiate, widen, and sustain a war sits with the president and the political machinery around him. That matters because the usual national security ritual wants to present this as a technical problem of finite resources. It is not. Finite resources are a fact. The choice to spend them on an expanding conflict is a political decision. The administration created the shortage by choosing the war path and then pretending the bill would stay hidden. Scarcity is the policy. The Pentagon's predicament is not accidental mismanagement in the abstract. It is what happens when an imperial state tries to defend multiple fronts at once: Israel, the Mediterranean, NATO eastern edge, and the homeland itself. The source says European Command is central to defense aid for Israel, while also needing to stay ready for Russian pressure and missile threats to the U.S. mainland. That is not resilience. That is overextension with a flag on it. The key phrase in the report is not support for Israel or regional stability. It is choose defense of the United States homeland over that of Israel. That sentence strips away every polite fiction. When the stockpiles run low, priorities become visible, and the priority order embedded in the system was always political, not neutral, despite the way officials like to dress it up. The article softens deliberate harm. The reporting is strongest when it lets the military speak plainly about depletion. It gets weaker when it leans on the euphemism of competing for finite resources, as if war weariness were some impersonal weather system. Resources do not deplete themselves. Munitions do not vanish into thin air. They are spent because leaders authorize spending them, and because the political class accepts a model of endless military saturation while pretending no one has to pay the operational cost. That is the misdirection running through the story. The public is invited to see a staffing or logistics concern. What this actually reveals is the architecture of American militarism. One branch of the state is made to absorb the consequences of another branch's political choices, and the whole apparatus is then described as though it simply happened. Strategy is the missing word because accountability is missing too. The most honest line in the piece comes from the think tank voice asking, "What's the strategy here?" Exactly. That is the question the political class almost always buries under abstractions about deterrence, readiness, and commitments. Strategy would require admitting the objective, the exit, the trade-offs, and the human cost. Instead, Washington gets improvisation, secrecy, and a permanent emergency posture. Trump's Iran war is not just a foreign policy blunder. It is a demonstration of how quickly executive violence drains the state it claims to strengthen. The country is told it can project force everywhere, support every client, and still preserve its own security. That is fantasy maintained by institutions that refuse to say no until the hardware runs thin. The larger pattern. This is what authoritarian politics looks like in practice: reckless escalation above, managed scarcity below, and a compliance culture that treats depletion as an unfortunate side effect rather than the predictable outcome of bad rule. The Pentagon's warning is not reassurance. It is evidence that the machinery of American power is being used as if consequences belong to someone else. They do not. The consequences belong to the people who chose the war, the institutions that enabled it, and the political order that keeps calling this kind of damage strategy. You've been listening to Systemic Error. Thanks to Alternet for today's article. With the automated voice of Kizil, thanks for listening.